Maduro and Chavez during his later years tried to overcome this by starting public supermarkets and other distribution centers through which these commodities reach ordinary people. So there were efforts made by the Venezuelan government to overcome these scarcities. But even now, what we need to understand is there are hardships, but education is still free in Venezuela. Health is a right, and it's free of cost available in Venezuela. So what United States is doing today is violating all those principles and going against the Charter of the United Nations, abducting a president who was elected by the people of a country and taking him to their country to be tried according to their laws. Very strong debate on this issue, and many countries, particularly Russia, of course, and China, have vehemently condemned and voiced their opposition to the US Act. But interesting fact is, France also had given a very strong condemnation in the Security Council.
Hello and welcome to Left Lens. Today we have Comrade Arun Kumar with us. He's a Politburo member of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, a former student leader. He is now heading the international department of the party. Comrade Arun, welcome to Left Lens. Good to have you with us. Comrade, in this new year, the biggest development in international affairs is the bombing of Caracas and the kidnapping of President Maduro by the United States of America. So let's look at this issue in the current episode of Left Lens. The United States is saying that the Venezuelan government, clandestinely or otherwise, was operating or supporting a drug cartel that was supplying drugs to the entire world. Many people seem to be buying into this argument. Some are saying that what happened in Venezuela was inevitable because Maduro is portrayed as a dictator and that he was fudging election data. There are also those who point out to Venezuela's economy being in shambles and the fact that millions of Venezuelans are now residing in many of its neighboring countries. How do you respond to all of this?
See, there are four issues that you have raised here. The first one was the allegation of narco trafficking on Maduro and that he is heading a cartel.
Yes.
The recent New York Times report, I think, or some of the US media report says that this cartel which Maduro is being associated is not actual a cartel. It's all a fictitious thing. The second thing is about the amount of drugs that reach United States from Venezuela. Reports say that it's only 10 to 15-20% of the drugs which US is consuming or reach US actually originate from the Venezuelan soil. So most of the drugs are not from Venezuela, but they are from other parts of the world. So this allegation on Maduro is not justified. Then, in fact, the duplicity of Donald Trump can also be understood when we look into the fact that Donald Trump had recently pardoned Juan Hernandez Orlando, the former president of Honduras, who was in fact convicted by a US court for drug trafficking.
Yes.
So he was pardoned while Maduro is being alleged, and now he was kidnapped by the US on this flimsy allegation. The second thing is about Maduro being a dictator, which again is a false allegation. Because Maduro, it is not just Maduro who was alleged to be a dictator. In fact, this allegation has started from Chavez's time. First election of Chavez was welcomed by United States. Subsequently, whenever Chavez was being elected as president or whenever there was an election, it was all alleged as manipulated elections and there is no democracy in Venezuela. In fact, since the first election of Chavez till Maduro's second election as president, there were 15 elections roughly held on various levels in Venezuela, and all the 15 elections were observed by international election observers, and they have found out that there were no malpractices involved in the elections, and even the popular participation in these elections is also relatively high, like more than 70% of the people have voted for in these elections.
Yes.
Only recently we find that there is a dip in the voter participation in the election. That is due to various reasons, but that cannot be attributed to being non-democratic or fudging elections or Maduro being a dictator. If Maduro was a dictator, opposition wouldn't have contested all these elections, and that they are contesting, that they are participating, and that they are also elected to some of the state governorships shows that there is democracy in Venezuela. So this is also a second false allegation. Then the third question is about economic shambles in Venezuela.
Yes.
So if yes, it can be said that Venezuela is going through a very rough patch vis-a-vis its economic condition. And what is the reason for that is also something that we need to understand. So Venezuela is rich in natural resources, particularly oil. It has the largest known oil reserves in the world. But in spite of that, why is it having these economic hardships or difficulties? The reason is United States, right from 2015, I think, after Obama had become the president, he in fact started imposing sanctions on Venezuela on various counts.
Yes.
And every year these sanctions had got further strengthened, and they were intended to strangulate Venezuela. According to a report 2-3 years back, 3.1 million people have lost their lives because of these sanctions on Venezuela. And they have created an artificial scarcity of essential commodities in Venezuela. So most of the private distribution points in Venezuela, where food and other commodities were supposed to be distributed to the people, they were controlled by private oligarchs. And these people, because of their affiliation to US and international finance capital, they stopped distributing these commodities, and they started hoarding these commodities, creating an artificial scarcity. In fact, Maduro and Chavez during his later years tried to overcome this by starting public supermarkets and other distribution centers through which these commodities reach ordinary people. So there were efforts made by the Venezuelan government to overcome these scarcities. But even now, what we need to understand is there are hardships, but education is still free in Venezuela. Health is a right, and it's free of cost available in Venezuela. So these are some of the things that we need to understand when we discuss about economy of Venezuela. So the last thing, what are the reasons for this?
What could be the real reason why something like this happened?
Why US had went on its aggression on Venezuela. That is more to do with its ambitions to dominate the entire world and also dominate the Western Hemisphere in particular, which Trump has expressed in as many words. So Venezuela is attacked because of its proximity and close cooperation with Cuba, because it has quite good relations with Russia, Iran, and China. And precisely why is Venezuela having relations with these countries? Because these are the countries that stood by Venezuela when the US had imposed sanctions on it. So one, you force Venezuela to maintain relations only with those countries which stand against United States. And then you say that Venezuela is standing with those countries which are opposed to the United States, and you take it as a ruse to attack it. So this exposes the entire game plan of the US, and it should be condemned, as the world over we find.
No. Comrade, you said that Venezuela is being forced to ally with countries that are not essentially allies of the US. Interestingly, when one of the charges that is made out against Maduro is that he possesses or there's a conspiracy to possess machine guns and other devices which can be used against the US. You see, this is very strange because any country that is not an ally of the US can be charged with something like this, which means any head of state or head of a military that is not an ally of the US can meet the same fate that Maduro and Venezuela has just met with. Also, a leader of a sovereign nation is being charged and is having to face trial in another sovereign country under that sovereign country's laws. The idea of sovereignty itself is thrown to wind.
Yeah.
You come from a tradition which is of the left, which upholds the sovereignty of nations and their independence. How do you look at this?
See, one, if possession of machine guns is considered a crime that you attribute it to a head of a state, I think Trump should be more clever enough to say that Maduro possesses missiles. Because as a head of a sovereign country, Venezuela has various kinds of arms and ammunition which it naturally should possess. And if that is an scale on which you want to measure anybody, Trump is the most biggest criminal because he has the largest nuclear arsenal at his command. So if we apply the same logic, somebody should immediately abduct Trump, which we don't actually want anybody to do,
Yes.
because we respect sovereignty of any country and every country, and we respect the wisdom of the people of all the countries, because ultimately it is with the people
Yes.
where the sovereignty rests. So the people of United States, fortunately or unfortunately, have elected Donald Trump as their president, so it should be respected. Similarly, when Maduro was elected as a president of Venezuela, it should be respected. Nobody has the right to trample on that sovereign right of the people of any country. And it is not just a question of the jurisdiction. There is something called the United Nations Charter. There is something called the United Nations, which was established by a common consent after Second World War. And there are some principles which are considered to be inviolable by all the countries in the world. So what United States is doing today is violating all those principles and going against the Charter of the United Nations, abducting a president who was elected by the people of a country and taking him to their country to be tried according to their laws, and all on frivolous charges. So this is all what it demonstrates is the United States contempt for international law.
It is very interesting that you mentioned this and made mention of the United Nations. See, the primary reason why the United Nations came into existence was to ensure world peace and security. Ever since this incident has happened, it's been almost a week now, many countries have condemned it, called for the UN Security Council to pass a resolution condemning this, but there seems to have been no effort from the UN Security Council or even from the UN to actually condemn what the United States has done, or to even call for or to demand the United States to return President Maduro to Venezuela. Why do you think the United Nations is unwilling or unable to do so?
It's not a question of UN unwilling to do anything. It's a question of its inability to do these things. Because the way United Nations was built up is also doesn't meet the needs of the modern times. See, a large section of the people, particularly of the countries coming from the global south, do not have a voice sufficient enough to represent their aspirations or what they feel in the United Nations, particularly in the Security Council. There are 5 nations who control, who have the power of veto in that. And so we cannot expect the United Nations Security Council to pass a resolution condemning an act of the US, because US has its own veto and it will be readily vetoing any such resolution. So we cannot expect such a resolution to come out from the United Nations Security Council. But interestingly, the meeting of the United Nations Security Council, when it was held, found a very strong debate on this issue. And many countries, particularly Russia, of course, and China, have vehemently condemned and voiced their opposition to the US Act. But interesting fact is, France also had given a very strong condemnation in the Security Council. In fact, this is also a reflection of the pressure that the countries are facing from the people. Because Macron, the president of France, was not ready to condemn it.
Yes.
While the foreign minister, before Macron could react, had condemned it. And now the French ambassador in the United Nations condemned it. So it shows the various contradictions that are coming out because of the popular pressure against US actions. So this is a much better representation of the will or the thought processes going among the people, which unfortunately the United Nations is unable to reflect.
You said that the United Nations is unable to reflect the thought process of the people. Speaking of the people, in Venezuela now we have people protesting, demanding that their leader be returned to them. In 2002, when there was a failed coup attempt against the then president Hugo Chavez, also we had seen people take out to the streets. Around the world, there are demonstrations happening in several parts, in cities and villages alike. Do you think all this will force the UN to rethink? Also, because you said that the UN has an inability to respond, do you think that the United Nations should be restructured? How so?
See, I don't think if these protests and demonstrations will have a impact on the United Nations to act, because United Nations is a body which cannot act. And Security Council is something, as I have explained, has US with its veto power, so it will not come out with any recommendation to or suggestion or condemnation against the US Act. But what these protests and demonstrations will impact is public opinion in the US, which rightly is now expressed in a big way, condemning Trump's actions. So, in fact, if at all there will be an impact of this protest, it will be on the countries of these allies of US and also the US. And that is what we also are intending these demonstrations to actually play their role in this entire event. So the next question that we are talking about is what was that?
How can the restructuring of the United Nations be?
That is much broader discussion. How can the United Nations be restructured? Because India is a major country and it is trying to become a permanent member of the Security Council. Then Germany is vying for a spot. Brazil is vying for a spot. And three of them are trying to work together to do that. And this is where the contradiction emerges. Because India, if it moves with Germany, people will not be supporting it. And India, if it is, as the Indian government statement is issued against Venezuela, if it takes up such a position, kowtowing to United States and not showing spine to stand up against the United States, we cannot expect the third world countries to come in support of India's bid for a permanent member position in the United Nations. So of course this is all a big thing, but it's all related to what kind of foreign policy positions these countries take upon.
You said about several the United Nations itself being unable to act against the US because it has a veto power. So speaking of the US, in 2025 itself, it has bombed 7 countries. In this century, we have the examples of Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan before us. We are seeing their involvement in places like Palestine and Ukraine. If we go back further, we have examples from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa. It is almost like, when they feel they want to attack, they attack. and they do it without any repercussions. Do you think that the United States is a threat to world peace?
Of course. An interesting fact is that throughout the independent history of the United States, 93% of its time was spent on wars on other nations. So I think now it is around 400 years or odd since the independence of United Nations, 1771.
250.
250, 300 years. So since then, if you calculate how many years it was involved in war and how many years it was having a peaceful life without any war over another country, 93% of his time it is involved in external aggression. So that speaks that the United States is a major threat to the world peace because it doesn't respect other countries' sovereignty. It goes on bombing. It intervenes in the internal affairs of other countries. It wants to enforce a regime change. It wants whoever it doesn't like. Right, it might be its next door neighbor or its far off country. It doesn't matter for it. It thinks that it has got a right to rule over the entire world. So as long as this imperialist attitude exists within the United States, it is always a threat to world peace. And now you see Canada, which was considered to be one of its closest allies,
yes.
And it is also part of the Five Eyes network,
yes.
Anglo English speaking world.
Yes.
So now Trump wants to say annex it, saying that it will. He wants it to be the 51st state of United States. Now Greenland, it's a NATO ally.
Yes.
Denmark. So he is now saying that he wants Greenland to become part of U.S. territory. So U.S. doesn't is not now under Trump is unable to distinguish between its allies or its enemies. What it is concerned or what it is bothered about is territorial expansion, which is something which we have seen in the early part of last century, which led to the First World War and led to the Second World War.
Yes.
So this is something is very dangerous phenomena that we are now witnessing, particularly after the national security strategy of Donald Trump.
Yes.
Was released in the first week of December.
Yes.
And Trump is saying that Monroe Doctrine will be brought again. He says that it is officially it is the Trump corollary of Monroe Doctrine. He likes to call it as Monroe Doctrine. But whatever it is something which is ominous to the entire world and to the world peace.
When it is clear that the US is a threat, and US actions in Venezuela is posing a threat to countries in that region as well as to others, there are many who are asking, Venezuela is so far away from India. Why are you bothered about it? Why are you responding to it? In fact, if you look at social media, some are even asking, what is wrong with the left and the communists that you guys are extending solidarity to Venezuela? So let me ask, Kumar, what is wrong with the left and the communists that we are extending solidarity to Venezuela?
Actually, I think it is nothing wrong with the left or the Communist Party of India Marxist, but it is much a thought which is being promoted, even unfortunately by the judiciary. Suppose when we want to, it's not a new thing, like actually, when we were organizing solidarity demonstrations with Palestine. Unfortunately, the Mumbai High Court had said that left or the Communist Party should be more concerned with the slums
Local
and
jugis.
And what they don't realize or what they are refusing to look at is we talk about the jugis, we talk about the slums, and we also talk about Palestine and Venezuela. We are concerned with all these issues because we find that they are all interlinked.
Yes.
For instance, India is one of the biggest purchasers of oil from Venezuela earlier and then from Iran. And why? Because these are the world's two cheapest oil suppliers. And we used to buy it. 2005 when Chavez was here, we had inked a pact with Chavez to buy their oil at a cheaper price. And Chavez has agreed to do that. And if we, in fact, had committed ourselves to that agreement, we would have got oil at a cheaper price, and that would have reduced a lot of inflation and benefited a lot of poor people who are living in precisely in those juggis and jhopalis and in those slums.
Yes.
So this is the link that we find, one. The second thing is, India has ONGC Videsh
Yes.
has agreed with the Venezuelan counterparts to help and extract oil from the largest reserves which Venezuela possesses. ONGC Videsh, in fact, I think is operating 2 rigs in that area,
Yes.
extracting oil. So when there is no sovereign rights that are being protected in Venezuela, that is going to impact even this right or this agreement that was concluded between ONGC Videsh and Venezuelan government. So once Trump says that Maduro doesn't have a right to govern, or he doesn't have any power and it is only the American dictates that run the country, what happens to the agreement that Indian government had signed with Venezuelan government? So if these agreements are not respected, it is going to be hurting our interests. After all, Indian government had signed this agreement thinking that it is beneficial to Indian people. So the other reason is, see, India, when it was fighting for the freedom, we and our freedom struggle was supported by various countries who are also fighting against colonialism. So if we think that this struggle or this support did not help in Indian freedom struggle, it is nothing short of foolishness. So solidarity is something which is a must and which is our bounden duty. And Gandhi had, in fact, when the question again going back to Palestine, he said that just as Palestine, India belongs to Indians or France belongs to the French, Palestine belongs to the Palestinians. And the Indian freedom movement at that point of time expressed its solidarity to the Palestinian struggle for independence, for their own homeland. So this is a tradition that we inherit from our forefathers who fought against the colonialism. What the Venezuelans are doing now is fighting against US imperial aggression. We fought against British colonialism. They are doing the same now against the US. So we share this common bond of struggle against aggressors and struggle against oppressors. So it is our duty as who have experienced this kind of colonial subjugation to stand by somebody who is fighting for their own rights and sovereignty. So it is something that the BJP and the present government wants the people of India to forget. And it is something that the BJP is trying to use the media or browbeat the media into propagating that this is not a necessary feature. It is something only confined to the left or somebody who is crazy internationalist. It is not a crazy idea. It's actually a humanistic principle that Indian freedom fighters have stood for. And what is crazy is about being nonchalant and not trying to stand up when there is a big attack on humanity happening in other parts of the world.
You hinted at how what is happening in Venezuela could hurt India's interests. Yet the Indian government made a statement that did not condemn the US. They merely expressed concern. They asked for dialogue. It almost seemed like we are going back on our glorious tradition of extending solidarity, as you just mentioned. Do you think that this position that we are taking now of not standing up to aggressors, of not defending sovereignty and independence of nations is going to hurt us in the long run?
Of course. See, the Indian government position is worse, to say the least. We have a glorious tradition of standing by the interest. Indian freedom movements sent volunteers to the Spanish Civil War in 1930s fighting against fascist Franco. We were sending a regiment of doctors to China when they were fighting against Japanese aggressors. So this is a tradition that we always had. And this got reflected in the Indian foreign policy also, standing by the interests of global south or third world developing countries. And India used to unequivocally condemn whenever there is an attack on sovereignty anywhere taking place. And Indian Parliament had a huge discussion when US had invaded Iraq in 2003 and refused to even allow US planes to refuel. Forget about sending somebody, some soldiers or boots on Iraq soil. Now that tradition is being forgotten or wantonly destroyed by this present BJP government led by Modi. The reasons are, we have, after 2008, when India had signed the US nuclear deal, Indo-US nuclear deal, we said that at that point of time that this is not just a nuclear deal, but it has got a wider ramifications for Indian foreign policy. We have placed our defense in the laps of US. Every 10 years now we have been renewing Indo-US defense framework.
Yes.
Now recently in 2025 also we have again renewed that defense policy framework. And what does all this mean? Like, we are saying that we will not raise a single finger against US, whatever be its aggression. That was why our foreign policy was wavering even and vacillating even on the question of Palestine. 4 times we have abstained instead of condemning Israel's action. And that is the reason why the government is, instead of being muscular, showing that it's a cowardly policy when the question of condemning aggression on Venezuela is coming up today.
All right, Kumar. Thank you for joining us and discussing all these issues in detail. I hope that the protest actions that is happening in different parts of the world, as well as the international community and the UN, will be able to make the US come to its senses. I hope that our own Indian government will be able to correct its course. Let's hope that the upcoming days there will be further actions towards that. With that, we will wrap this episode of Left Lens. Thank you.